Welcome to our online panel on France, racism, Islamophobia, and the issues that are now unfolding in Europe. This panel is organized by Center for Middle Eastern Studies that is based in Ankara, and I welcome all of you wherever you are in the world. And also I welcome our panelists, Abdul Nur Toumi, Anas Al-Tikriti, Hamish Khiriyat, and Yan Ismail. We have got excellent line of speakers today who are experts on the issues that I have just mentioned. So we will cover a number of issues today, starting, of course, with the background and the context. So here I just would like to give the floor to Abdul Nur Toumi. Abdul Nur, now there is a lot of discussion in France, and also there are some legal, I think, developments that will be discussed later on. So the presence of Islam in France has been always a contested issue. And it seems that in recent months, this issue became almost a mainstream discussion in the media, in the academia. Can you please give us some background about the perception of Islam and the presence of Muslims in France, and how French mentality is shaped vis-a-vis the presence of Islam and Muslims in France today? Because France has one of the largest Muslim community in Europe. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President. And I have a special thank for our some president and vice president who worked very hard to gather us on such a wonderful meeting. And also, I would say, I'm honored to share the panel with my distinguished colleagues. As far as the main question goes on what's going on lately here in France about the issue of, let's say, Islam and politics, or Islam and the relation with the French secularism principle. Chronologically, France has been dealing with Islam and Muslims for, it's not decades, but for centuries. And then this relation has been developed lately, let's say, in the post-colonial era, and in following the defeat of the French colonialism and French colonial from all its presence in Africa, and notably in North Africa, and particularly in Algeria. So after that, in the 60s and the 70s, and even in mid 80s, it was this kind of discussion. I mean, that's such a good point to mention discussion is not debate, because there is no debate. And even though if we try to frame this into a constructive debate, so we have to speak with the Muslims, not about Islam. But this is, maybe I will touch down on this later. So chronologically, the elements of this sterile discussion was back then in the 70s and in 80s, let's say, cornered on the ethnic element, meaning by this, the connotation has, or even the semantic element was about Arabs, was not about Muslims. So it went on for, let's say, decade and a half, and then it didn't work well for the far-right movement, and then it was a political party that was the Front National, and then it changed the name recently into Rassemblement National. It was led by Jean-Marie Le Pen, who was using the Arab as France's boogeyman or France's malaise. But that at that time, it was in France a solid political establishment. They were kind of heavy politicians, either on the right or on the left, on the Socialist Party or on the classic French right party. At that time was portrayed by the RPR and led by Jacques Chirac, and then had very heavy leaders with him, Philippe Seguin, and also Alain Juppé. On the other side, on the French side, it was also the Socialist Party who was at its golden age. It was then Mitterrand, Jospin, Michel Rocard. And then the development of this ideology, or these two rival ideologies, they were having something to offer to their voters. It was the issue of right-left. And then in the late 80s, so with the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the ideologies, so it was kind of, let's say, a renaissance for the extremist movements in Europe and particularly in France. But it went on, at that moment, the Front National, currently Rassemblement National, as I mentioned, was led by Jean-Marie Le Pen, started to challenge the establishment and notably the right. And the right party, the conventional right party, at that moment felt the heat. And we have to mention a very interesting point here. It started with Jacques Chirac's discourse in Orléans in 1991, when he mentioned in one of his speeches, and at that time he was running for president in 1995, so he wasn't leading in the government or the prime minister. At that moment, they were in the opposition, and then his party won the election in 93. So he mentioned these two words, smell and noise. So these two words kind of, they delegitimize the far-right rhetoric toward the, at that moment or at that time, were the Arabs. So the boogeyman of France or the French malaise was the Arabs. And then it developed like progressively until the tragic event of 9/11, and everything changed ever since, geopolitically speaking. So it had a direct effect in the French politics. So the Muslim anti-sentiment began to be, let's say, more kind of not taboo. So they touch on this taboo, and it became kind of soft speech. And then it went on until the riots of 2005 here in France. So in the so-called banlieue for the hubs of the immigrants. And at that moment, they, in the 70s, even late 60s, they were calling this area the hard-working place because they were actually inhabited by the majority of the immigrants.
Abdul Nur,
yes.
Thank you very much. So far, I think you have clearly explained the background and how a racist rhetoric or anti-Islamic rhetoric started to emerge in the French context. Now, I would like to turn to Dr. Enes El-Tikriti, because as we have said, there's a gradual, I think, shift from mainstream politics to a more marginal issues and marginal politics. Enes, you have worked on the European, I think, issues. And when we look at Europe, how we can compare it? Is this a French issue only? Or there is a wider context and wider, I think, impact of such rhetoric and discourse when it comes to relations of Islam and European mind? You can turn your mic on. Your mic is off, yeah?
Thank you very much, Talib, and my thanks and gratitude goes to the Center for Middle Eastern Studies in Ankara. I believe that this is an extremely timely discussion, And it's a discussion that's happening on many, many fronts and addressing various perspectives because it is a sophisticated and very complicated issue. It's not something that we can merely reduce to one element or two reasons or the such. But in attempt to address your question, obviously within the European context, and I'll focus on the Western European context because I think that Eastern Europe has its own unique dynamics. But Central and Western Europe generally share much of the phenomena that drives France in the way that it does. However, there is no question that France stands in a unique position in adopting what even some European politicians openly declared as an extreme format of secularism as they see it. When you speak to the Scandinavian countries, when you speak to the United Kingdom even, you'll find that there is a sort of dissatisfaction with the way in which France sees and, more importantly, implements its model and mode of secularism, as it throws up a various array of questions and challenges that presents the kind of challenges that give rise to extremism of all sorts, whether it be religious and fanatical, Islamic, for instance, tendencies, or whether it's even secular extremism in the way that we have often seen in the case of France. But whilst we say this, it's also important to note that yes, there is a difference between France and other Western European countries, but it's not like they are on a different track. These European countries are on a similar track to France, they're just lagging behind. So unless these issues are properly addressed, I fear that the countries who look at France right now and say, no, we don't accept this, are soon approaching that particular point when they will start adopting the same narrative and probably even the same policies and laws when it comes to the issue of religion. And specifically, out of all the religions, Islam stands to be the religion where France has a very deep-rooted problem. Now, the question as to why that is, I mean, when we talk about secularism, let's be absolutely honest. France is being hypocritical in this regard. Because, the Catholic Church stands in very, very high esteem within French society. The nature of the church and the historical background and the such, yes, it doesn't have, any kind of input in daily life and specifically political life. But you can't dismiss the fact that the church stands in very high esteem within French everyday life somehow or another. People get married in churches, people baptize their children, people respect the priest and the such. So this is something that I think is extremely hypocritical when all of a sudden a woman wearing a headscarf on her head becomes a problem for all of French society. This is something that people who don't understand or appreciate French society particularly can't understand. Why is it, for instance, that no one will argue with anyone donning a cross or a crucifix, for instance, but at the same time, someone who wears a headscarf is extremely problematic, is something that presents some sort of crisis almost to French society. So whilst, as I said, France is way ahead, but it doesn't mean that other countries are immune from the same rhetoric and the same zeal. All of this is happening within a context of a world, of a globe that is driven by populism, unfortunately. And whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, the issue of Islam and Muslims, particularly in the West, whether it be due to numbers, whether it be due to the legacy of Western Europe and North America in terms of their relationship with the Muslim world, with the Middle East, with North Africa and the such, this is something that constructs a sophisticated and complex cultural issue of deep-rooted problems for these societies, which manifest in the ways that we have seen in recent weeks.
Well, thank you very much. I think that comparative analysis is a very significant one. Let's say, Islamophobic rhetoric is not only in France, it is elsewhere as well, but in France it seems to be much more dominant and much more strong. I think here I will just turn to Hamid, because he looks at the media and maybe he can tell us how this issue is unfolding in the media, because media is an important tool to portray a community, to establish a sort of identity. And what we know before is that, in a book that is titled like Covering Islam, that is written by late Edward Said, I think he has provided ample evidence that the media plays a role in constructing a discourse and rhetoric. Hamid, can you please tell us what is the position of the French media and how such discussions are being held? Because we know Charlie Hebdo issue, the attack on the Charlie Hebdo issue, but later on the caricatures again being displayed all around the world. What is the role of the media in all the events that we are now witnessing in France?
Thank you. I would like to thank beforehand to thank the all panelists and even the people who are inviting me, particularly Abdel Noor to me, as a brother Abdel Noor. Yeah, this question is very important when you analyze the coverage of the media in France about the Muslim community. I think we have to distinguish between many things. This issue is very complicated, and we cannot, I will say, resume the all coverage media in 15 minutes, or of course 5 minutes. There is a three major historical, I will say, speech or coverage media with the Muslim community. The first things, it's when we will have the oil crisis in 1972, of course, Islam became a main problem, and the French people discovered what is Islam. I will say that French people are not really religious. That's the main important things. If we analyze the French society, we see that the first political party is the abstention. And we have to tell this truth, because French people are not really involved in politics, of course. And the main problem in this time for the media is they did not give, the speech for the French people to talk about Islam. The first main problem, it was also the Algerian crisis with the civil war, and this is also affected historically the relation between Algeria and France. As they said, Abdel Noor Toumi, France colonized North Africa, and there was every time, and still there is every time, a controversy about the colonization. I will just remind us, in 2015, there were a law in the French Parliament that they call it the positive of colonization in Algeria and North Africa. This was a very controversial law in France, and in the former government with the president Bouteflika, the Algerian made a very strong statement by saying that it is unacceptable to vote this law. So there's every time between North African and France, and even the French Muslim, I will say a tension which started with Islam, but which became not only a religious problem with an identity problem. It transformed as a religious problem to identity. Because why? Because the political class, the elites, they don't have, I will say, a response to the social and economic problem. And this is for 30 years, they have been stigmatizing the French Muslim people as a solution. And when you analyze this, and this is very funny, when you analyze this in the media, mainly particularly in the French media, that they talk about Islam, but when they analyze this, the French Muslim people, they talk about French events, that any links with France. But at the same time, the Republic wants to create a France, Islam of France. And this is a big paradox we have to expose as well. So I will say that this is the second point. And the third point is after the 11th September, of course, how Muslim was treated. This is not also a French issue, but is a world issue. And I will anticipate your response, of course. How Muslims today in the world have to respond is to propose, say many ideas, but also to fight this Islamophobia by creating a channel media, because our fight today is about media. As you know, image are covering by words, and words are very important, can change a lot of mind of people. And today we are, like I will say, the first war is the war of images and words. That's why today Muslim community and Muslim countries in the world, they have to invest in the media mainstream to show, first of all, the truth of Islam, but also to show the history of Islam, which is important. And this is also in France today. We don't have a lot of historians who talk in the media about the history of Islam, the benefits of Islam in Western Union, and particularly in France. We have only a religious person who talk about Islam. And that is confusing. A lot of French political say to the Muslim, we have to distinguish and to differentiate between religion and politics, and also the republic. But at the same time, most of French Muslim people that are invited in the media are religious. If we really are serious and we need to distinguish these two things, we need to invite some intellectual people and historians who can distinguish and who can to show the benefits of Islam in France and particularly in Western Union. That's why it's very important to,
Hamid,
I would say, to give these pictures.
Hamid, thank you very much. So we will come to the proposals for solutions. Of course, there are some, I think, issues that Muslims should address as well. It is not the responsibility of the French or European politicians. Muslims have some responsibilities and duties to represent their religion in the community. I think that is very important that you touched on. I think in the next rounds, we will talk about what Muslims can do. And you also, I think, explained quite well the role of the media, especially in recent years. Now we have got the social media, there is no boundaries, and there are lots of images circulated. And I think that is a very important role. I think you also mentioned something about, constructing French Islam. Now these days, this is also a discussion. Now, I just would like to turn to Yannis in this context, because you also talked about, some political issues.
I would like, just if you give me, yeah.
Sure, yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I would like just to give me, if you give me just 1 second, I would like just to underline the importance of not bipolarizing the Western Union and Muslim world, because we have, as well as you know, and Turkey, for example, is between the Western and the Muslim world, as you know, geographically. So this is important that we have also a European Muslim citizens, and that's why we need to distinguish and not to bipolarize the Muslim world and the Western Union.
Okay,
but I would like to make this important point.
Okay, thank you, Yannis. I just would like to turn to you as a political scientist and as an observer of the French political sphere. Now, what we see that, most of the images, most of the rhetoric narrative, these are constructed by politicians, intellectuals plus politicians. And when you look at the narrative and language of the politicians in France, what sort of concepts, what sort of images, what sort of essentialist ideas that they use in order to profile Muslims? Because when we talk about extremism, when we talk about radicalism, I think these are some of the concepts that politicians use very easily without, predicting the results, especially when it comes to the Muslim community. What is the role of politicians, and what sort of concepts are circulated in the discussions these days in France? Yannis.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would like to clarify something, is that when we talk about France, we should be aware that we have many critical voices in France which are refusing what is going on. We have many academics, even some politicians, but the problem is that the dominant tendency now is promoting this idea that Islam is a problem and Muslims are a problem in France, and the critical voices are marginalized, and there is a big high level of pressure. The other element is that we have a gap in France between the reality of the Muslim daily life, the reality of the practice of Islam, and the perception of many people, and I would say the ideological view which is promoted in medias and by politicians. To give you one example, after all terrorist attack in France, you have all Muslim organizations, all Muslim public figures who are clearly condemning every kind of violence and extremism. But we heard in the media many voices saying, oh, why Muslims are silent? Why Muslims are quiet? Why we don't hear Muslim voices criticizing extremism? And on the ground, Muslims are doing it since decades. And it's one of the main elements of the Muslim discourse now. And this tendency is not new. Islamophobia is not new, but we reach a very, very critical level. Muslims are not only the scapegoat, they are the inner enemy. And it's very problematic in the discourse. And to give you an example, there is also tension between two things. And this is why France is criticized at a worldwide level, and not only in the Islamic world, but also in UK, in USA, in Canada. And we saw, for instance, the Washington Post putting a title like, instead of fighting systemic racism, France wants to reform Islam. Or the New York Times put a title, is France fueling Muslim terrorism by trying to prevent it? And you have officials in France saying, oh, but the world don't understand France and what we really promote and what we really think. In fact, they totally understood what is going on in France, but there is a kind of hypocrisy in France, because there is this claim of universalism, of being the country of human rights, and at the same time, when it comes to some discrimination, religious discriminations against Muslims, saying, oh, but we have a cultural exception because of our laicity. And because of this, France, for instance, has been condemned by the UN Committee for Human Rights. So in many points related to this, some French laws or French policies are not compliant with universal human rights, which France is claiming to be the sources. So this is a big paradox. And in fact, the problem is that many people in France are trying to hide some hate speeches, some promotion of discriminations against Muslims behind beautiful words. Say, no, but it's the laicity, it's secularism, it's freedom of speech. And behind this beautiful concepts, there is something which is very bad and very dangerous. And we have inner voices in France. I can quote, for instance, one of the best specialists of secularism, Jean Bobéro, who is saying since decades that the tendency now in France is not compliant with what laicity was historically. So they are even in contradiction with the French tradition of laicity in itself. And I give you one example. The French law on laicity of 1905 is saying that for agents of the state, you have to have a religious neutrality. Like you can't put a religious sign, for example. But this element is not for the average citizens. And more, they are promoting new laws to oblige the average citizen also to be neutral religiously. And this is not what laicity is saying. This is not what the law originally is saying. And they try to make new laws. The same thing when they try to prevent some Muslim woman wearing a headscarf.
Yes, Yanis,
yes.
Thank you very much. I think so far you have really beautifully explained some of the issues, problematic issues with regard to secularization or secularism in France. So we will come to legal challenges and legal developments, because as you have just rightly said, France introduced some bans on Muslim wearing headscarf, and now there's a new law I think, to be discussed in the French Parliament. So we will come to that in a minute. Now, I just would like to turn to Abdul Nurtumi, because he was also providing this historical context to us, because we really need to understand the French case, because France, as Anas El-Tikriti said, a little bit, exception compared to the other, I think, European experiences. And you said, Yanis, that there has been shift in the perception and understanding of laicite and secularism. Laicite used to be more, let's say, maybe inclusive, more freedom-oriented, but today there is a different picture when you compare French laicite with that of the Europe or with the US laicite. There is a completely, contradicting issues. Now, the freedom of religion, freedom of civil liberties in France seems to be curtailed in the context of, some attacks on civilians in France, because we have seen, there is a attack on a teacher here and there, and I think that also triggered such discussions. But now, Abdul Nurtumi, when I look at France, the motto of French Revolution, the liberty, equality, and fraternity, that is supposed to be universal, as Yanis said, and Hamid also said. These are universal values that France used to promote all over the world. What happens to these values today? Liberty, fraternity, equality, when it comes to Muslims and other minorities, not necessarily Muslims.
Sure. I mean, this is the motto of the French secular republic, and liberty, equality, and fraternity. But sure, I mean, to some point, to some extent, to be fair, there is liberty in France. And I would say many Muslims, a large majority of Muslims, are enjoying this principle of, again, universal human rights, and such a valuable characteristic for the humanity. But when it comes to the equality, is getting slowly. I mean, there are a process that the Muslims in France have been fighting for decades to finally, we say, reach some equality. And this is also the, let's say, the third generation of the immigrants are enjoying this, again, universal element. But when it comes to fraternity, okay, let's hold on this, maybe between us, but not there yet. Because here, when it comes to fraternity, it's a brotherhood. So, and this is the dilemma of the French politicians and the French elite and media. Now, when they heard Islam, and I think you know that, and we have been following this, they just add to it political Islam, which rhymes with the brotherhood movement. So all now the devoted Muslims are brothers, which is, I mean, ironically, it goes with the third element of this universal value of the French Republic. But I think there is a very interesting element here. I think we just missed what France, I mean, I can ask this question by saying what went wrong in France with Islam. The answer to this, first of all, they didn't learn anything from the last 3 decades developments when it comes to Islam. So the message was, it started in 1989 with these 2 young, beautiful sisters who were in junior high at that moment, wearing the Islamic headscarf. At that moment, the French politicians looked at this from its societal, didn't look at it from its societal perspective or optic, but looked at it as a political development within the French society and the political establishment. It has been developed ever since until today, let's say, these two sisters at that moment, they were 12 or 13, maybe 14. Today, they are 43, 44 years old. It's a generation. I mean, and Islam didn't stop. It's developing, and it is spreading within the French society. As Brother Hamid said, the French by nature or by essence are secular, less religious. But when it comes to this element, it has, for them, it is too much. And that, I'm going to link this to the broader issue, to the fraternity issue. So why, I think we should be brothers. We should be brothers and sisters. And from the side of the Muslims, and the Muslims in France, and especially this generation or the last two generations who were born here, grew up here, their life is in here. France is their country. They're not going anywhere. They're staying here. But also at that moment, they were talking, the politicians, they were speaking about the integration process from the left side, the assimilation process from the right side. Why? Because they say, okay, we're going to integrate them. How? Through football or rap music. But later on, these children of those immigrants who worked very hard in the 60s, their children are staying here, and their children are saying, wait a minute, we can do better than playing football and singing rap music. We cannot be 2 millions of Zidans and Benzemas. So we need doctors, we need lawyers, we need businessmen, we need pilots, we need lawyers, etc., etc. So the point is, the principle of the French Republic, liberty, equality, fraternity, to bring together, and like rhymes also with the French secular system principle, which is live together. So they live together, and they are living here, and they are living together. The problem is from the other side, as I think it was one of our speakers mentioned it. So the politicians in this country, they have nothing to offer. And this is, it's worldwide spread. So
okay. Abdul, thank you very much. I think we come to a very critical point. I just would like to pick the brain of Anas Al-Tikri on this issue, because I think Abdul has really explained very beautifully about the challenges that Muslims are facing when they started to be more claiming, when they wanted to be present in the public sphere, because they want to, they want to be engineers, they want to become part of the French society. Then we have seen some problems. Now you live in UK, which is, fairly different when it comes to treatment of, I think, minorities and Muslims. In British schools, for example, people can go to schools with headscarf, as far as I know. However, the French case is different. French has really introduced some bans, legally, legal bans. How do you compare the two sides? Because Britain follows more multicultural, I think, policy, whereas, as Abdul Nur said, France follows and pursues more integrationist and more assimilationist policy. How would you compare and contrast the systems, and what are the benefits, pros and cons of these two models?
I wouldn't dare speak on behalf of French Muslims. Obviously, we have Hamid and we have Yanis, and obviously Abdul Nur, to speak quite eloquently on the status of Muslims in France. However, from an outside perspective, it seems to me that there is a problem in France that actually manifests the problem throughout Europe. France is a very clear picture of where Britain, Germany, Sweden, Italy, and Spain are heading. And the way I see it is that the problem of Islam and Muslims in France is preventing this case of integration. I mean, when we talk about integration has now become a politicized term. It really doesn't mean much. I don't understand what integration means, simply because my understanding of integration doesn't correspond with the state's definition of integration. In fact, it's not just the state or the establishment, it's various political parties who come to power. So today I have a conservative government who has a particular model in mind regarding integration. After that, I might have a Labour or liberal government which has a different definition. So the term integration actually is meaningless. I want a society that is governed by law and that has people as its citizens, where they share rights and responsibilities. I want to be an equal part of that society. I want to contribute towards society in the way that I choose, respecting everyone else and wanting everyone else to respect me. That, I believe, is a basic human notion, which unfortunately is missed by Europe today. And the reason I would suggest, one of the reasons, and like I said at the very start, it's a very complex issue, but one of the main reasons is that we have chosen to politicize the issue of identity and the issue of culture and faith. And that is why Islam is so difficult to absorb in the kind of mentality of the mode of society that we have in France and bit by bit in Europe as well. Also, the states, for instance, in the UK, I mean, if you compare where we are today in regards with Islamophobia with where we were 20 years ago, I would suggest that today we have a bigger crisis, although there is a bigger understanding of the problem of race. There is a bigger understanding of the problem of the other and how to deal with the other. But we have a far bigger problem. And one of the main reasons is because we have totally different socio-political dynamics running through society. I believe personally, if, touching on the subject at hand, I believe that President Macron's speech, for instance, is a far greater issue that we need to deal with than the crimes that were committed against either the French teacher or the killing in Avignon. I believe that that speech established that the state was bit by bit was becoming ideological. And it is always a problem for a politician to become an ideologue or a state and a government to become ideological. That is a deep, deep problem which we should always avert. But President Macron in his speech clearly outlined his ideology in dealing with Islam. And that, I believe, is something that we need to deal with. So once again, the problem is that Macron has a crisis at his hand as a president. His failing popularity, his crumbling economy, society divided on so many fragments, so many lines, so many divisions, with a rising sense of grievance and grudge and the such. And for some reason, he felt that moving more and more towards the right and adopting a populist narrative, specifically in regards with Muslims, was the way in which to gain some extra support and to solve some of his economic and political problems. I think that that is one of the worst things that politicians can do today, is that to politicize the relationship with the various sections of their own society.
Well, thank you, Anas. Now, coming back to Hamid, because Anas made some references to the Macron speech on Muslims in the country. And when you look at the content of that speech, Hamid, what are the main messages that the Macron is trying to give to Muslims? And one issue is particularly important to me. He is talking about French Islam. Is that possible to create a French Islam? And what he means by French Islam anyway? Can you please explain to us?
Yeah, thank you. The funny thing is that there is not really a definition of French Islam. This expression of French Islam has been, talking with many years in France, and no one can, particularly define this expression. So we even don't understand, a lot of academicians, politicians, don't understand what is this expression of French of Islam. There is only one Islam. When he did, the Muslim would have been reacted and have been boycotting about this, particularly these phrases. And after that, he delivered an interview in Al Jazeera to give a response to this misunderstanding. So I called, as he said. I think the main things in France is to de-Islamize the political speech against, the minority of French Muslim, as they said, the Islamophobia. how to dis-Islamize this speech in the political class is to give a political answer. We are confronting now with the French Muslim people in one main problem. The main problem is we have many associations, many organizations, but they are limited. Why? Because they cannot give a political answer or response. What we have to do now is the French Muslim has to involve in all political party to show what is the pictures of Islam and to give the all response. That is, I think, is the main response, because we have a lot of human rights organization, but they're limited. The next step has to be a political issue to give an answer to the political class and as well to the media channel to create and to promote many programs. Emmanuel Macron, as I said, and I advised him for...
Just a second, Hamid. Yeah. You are talking about representation of Muslims in mainstream politics and in other areas as well. I think that's a very good proposal, suggestion. But what are the limits of political representation? Is it easy for Muslims to become members of the mainstream political parties? Is it easy for Muslims to climb the ladders quickly? I mean, how far mainstream politics is open to embrace Muslims in French society?
Yeah, but that's why they have to do. The French Muslim community have to organize themselves to create. We have one, for example, party, a French Muslim party, who don't just speak with the French Muslim, but the all French people. And of course, in this party, there are many French who are not Muslim. I think this is important. The answer has to be a political answer. That's why I said before, Islam became a political matters, a problem. And we have, if we want to distinguish and to say that, and to don't mix religion with politics, we have as well to give a political answer, because many a far-right party and many extremists and Islamophobes saying that Islam has a problem, has a political problem in France. And that's what we have to do. We have to distinguish between these two things. And the answer can be only a political answer to clarify and to run for the election and to, of course, change the law, try to represent the Muslim community in the French parliament, in the whole society, in the whole organization. And that's why we will be respected, because politics, as you know, is important in any society, and particularly in France. And that's why, as I said, the organization and the French human rights organization are limited today, because they don't give a political answer. They can just, defend the French Muslim for their right. But we need more than an offensive action than defensive action today. That's what we need. We need as well the channels that can be clearly show the Muslim society, the French Muslim society, and the image. We need more, of course, think tanks. You know, in France, we don't have Muslim think tanks.
We will come to this one in the last round. We will talk about.
And the answer can also be an intellectual. Yeah, an answer can be only an intellectual answer in many aspects, such as media, such as think tanks, such as political class. That's why I think is the most important thing that we have to do today.
All right. Okay, I think we all agree that there should be more activism on the side of Muslims in all areas. Now, I just want to come back to Yanis, because I think I really like his analysis of the transformation of laïcité in the French context. Now, what we understand as laïcité is supposed to be neutral, as you said, and laïcité means non-intervention in the religious affairs of communities. But in that case, what we see is that the French laïcité is being transformed to become more interventionist in the community affairs. How would you interpret that, Yanis?
Yeah, you are totally right. And historically, laïcité means an autonomy for religion and religious communities, and the autonomy of the state when it comes to religion. And now, when it comes to Islam, and it's not new, but it's more stronger now, the state try to intervene on religious matters in order to control, or have a stronger control on Islam and Muslims. So when we know a little bit the French history, it's a kind of what we have called before Gallicanism. It was when France tried to create its own version of Catholicism and controlling it and being more independent vis-a-vis the Vatican. And it's very obvious when it comes to Islam and the speech of Emmanuel Macron, the French president, about so-called Islamist separatism was very clear about it. They try to promote what they call a French Islam, which is in fact an Islam which is politically domesticated and which is religiously liberal. And this vision of Islam is not recognized and accepted by the mainstream Muslim community. And the problem is that it's used politically also to demonize those who are criticizing this tendency. If you don't accept this tendency, you will be painted as an Islamist or someone who don't want to be integrated. And in fact, it's the opposite. When you see the Islamic discourse in France, the issue of citizenship, participation, being a positive part of the society, living together, are main elements of the Islamic discourse in France. And one of the tools of a part of the French elite and the government to promote this tendency, this so-called reform of Islam, is to promote a fake Muslim elite. So they are using some imams, some academics to say, look, we have some people who are Muslims, who are Arabs or from other backgrounds, and they are supporting what we are promoting. And it means that it's not Islamophobia, it's not something which is against Muslims, because we have Muslims with us. And this kind of policy has also some roots from the colonial era, like to use some people from a community against their own community and the mainstream tendency of this community. And you can see, for instance, in French medias, some imams of some so-called representatives of Muslims who are promoted by medias, by politics, and have some discourse which are considered by the majority of the Muslims as jeopardized and with no legitimacy. And instead of giving a solution, it's adding a problem to a problem. Because for many Muslims at a grassroots level, it's like an insult to promote these people. And it's something which will reinforce the anger of many Muslims. And what we forgot to say in general is that by this tendency to target Muslims, to demonize some some Muslims intellectuals or some positive voices from the Muslim community, they are promoting also for some weak people a kind of radicalization. And it's very dangerous because the Muslim community in France and the people who are legitimate to talk about this community want also to fight extremism and terrorism, but they are not considered as partners in this struggle, but as enemies. And it's very dangerous to go to this tendency.
Thank you, Yanis. Okay. Thank you. We will have one more round, so you will have some more time. Now, Abdul Nur Toumi, I think Yanis has told us that there are new challenges in the French society. And one challenge is that now France would like to disconnect the relations between Muslims in France from their native countries, wherever they come from. French, I think Macron has said, we don't want any more religious teachers, imams, or others from the sending countries. But on the other hand, Muslims need imams, Muslims needs religious education, because that's part of the freedom of religion and also a right for each and every citizen everywhere. I mean, they should be entitled to have their own religious inculcation, education, etc. But France does not support any religious education. No Islamic institution is supported. There is no faculty of theology or Kulliya Sharia in France. You know, how this issue will be addressed? I mean, yes, maybe on the rhetorical level, we don't want anybody from other countries, but how the French state will provide the satisfactory methods and institutions and finances for Muslims in France. Is that possible?
Sure, on paper, yes, it is possible, but here it needs a lot of work. I mean, it would start with the Muslim community, and always I like to add this, there is no such a Muslim community in France. There are Muslim communities. So they have to get all stuff together. So they have to organize themselves and will present or position themselves in the current political discourse as a solid partner with a sustainable project. So now it's very interesting what Dr. Yanis said about what President Macron wants to do with Islam. Actually, President Sarkozy, before him, he tried it, is to domesticate the Muslims. Therefore, they're looking for the good Muslims. So, and frankly, I don't know what does this mean, good Muslim. So good Muslim is the non-Muslim, but this is another topic because it is all about politics. And he wants to control the leaders of the Muslim communities. How? Because they think today there is a serious threat to the French political establishments, I mean, elite, media, all together, when it comes to the issue of Islam. Because it's no longer the Islam they had known in the 60s and the 70s. Today, there is, Muslims are offering something. They have a project, even though they still to get this project, to work on this project very hard to make it sustainable for their community and the other communities as well. So an interesting point here, and I focus a lot on the children, because the children are, again, the future. And as I said earlier, they're not going anywhere. They are staying here, it's their country. So they are a little bit disconnected from this discourse because they don't trust the politicians, and also they don't know about what President Macron is trying to do with their parents or the grandparents' native countries. Let's say, for instance, so what is the relation or what is the link to speak with the Moroccan and the Algerian authorities about how to run a mosque? Okay, in our level, we got it. So it's another topic. It's about intelligence. It's about domestic security. That's fine. But why should I speak to the Algerian authorities or the Moroccan authorities to send me an imam that he doesn't understand the culture of those people, of those children here in France, for instance? So, I mean, it's kind of paradoxical position. So on one hand, we want to have, let's say, so-called an Islam of France that is adapted to the French values. On the other hand, we bring the leader from outside. So does it make much sense? So they are missing the entire point because, as Dr. Anas mentioned it in his speech, it's all about ideology. And President Macron himself has become an ideologue since he has turned himself or wrapped up himself with ideologues. And speaking about those ideologues, it's one of them in the French media who has become the darling boy of the Marine land His name is Eric Zemmour. And Zemmour now is trying, actually he succeeded to some extent, the banalization of the xenophobic message to the point of the Zemmourization of the French politics on its view on Islam. So they put all together now all the Muslims in the eyes of the French, the white French, according to Eric Zemmour's views. And it's very, very dangerous because Eric Zemmour and his people are clear. I mean, in their message is clear. So they keep hammering, and it's the hammer effect until the white French people will hate more and more the Muslims / the Arabs. And this will actually, he mentioned it clearly in one of his writings, I think articles, even I think a book, he even predicted a kind of a civil war will erupt.
That's alarming, I think. So maybe we can talk about this person's views on a different panel. That's too much detail for us now. But thank you very much anyway for highlighting this issue. Anas, now, when we look at the roots of this Islamophobic and xenophobic discussions and debates and hate speech, etc., we see two things. One is essentialization of Islam and securitization of Islam. What we are going to do, or how we should go ahead to desecuritize Islam and de-essentialize Islam. What are your suggestions?
That's, I think, a very important question. And can I just touch on one thing in regards with the last round of questions that you asked the panelists, and that is, what should Muslims do? What could Muslims do in respect to this? One thing that I would like to mention is that, and I think I mentioned this in my earlier presentation, and that is that all that Muslims want is to be treated as equals. No favors. We don't want to be treated better than anyone else. We want to be treated as equals in the eye of the law, in the eye of of politicians and media and the such. That's all we want, and I think that that's a fair thing. And especially with the tenets of secularism as we understand it, that is basically what it is. But unfortunately, in practice, it's totally different. The worst thing that can happen is to ask a victim in a particular scenario, okay, what could you have done differently in order to avoid being victimized? You don't ask someone who's just been raped, what could you've done in order to avoid being raped? You don't do that. You don't ask, for instance, a black man in America, what could you do in order to solve racism within the white police officer? That can't happen. In the same way that, to be honest, from a principle point of view, asking Muslims in Europe or in France particularly, what should you do differently in order to avoid being victimized because you're Muslim? I think we're falling within the trap, the kind of narrative that we're being put in. The other thing, and coming to your question, the fact of the matter is we live in a Europe today that is, and over the past 10 years specifically, is deeply engrossed in introspective discussion regarding its own values and its own legacies. And at no junction in the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years even, was it more pressing than it is in this year, 2020, and particularly after the George Floyd murder in Minnesota in the United States of America. The whole world came to discuss the question of race, the question of the other, the question of how citizens of a particular country can be demonized. And by whom? By the protectors of the law, by the authorities of the law. And this has driven everyone, including France, as well as the United Kingdom and many, many other countries, to look at our own legacies. People going around checking the statues in London and Paris and various other cities and towns, saying these people have committed against humanity, either slavery, or they've killed, or they've committed mass murder and the such. How could they be seen and celebrated as part of our history and our legacy? We must come to question our own morals, our own standards. When we come to promote ourselves as Democrats, as proponents and supporters of human rights and of freedoms, and then we see that the exercise, our practice, totally defies all of that, then there is an existential crisis within. And this crisis does not relate to Muslims per se, it relates to society. So I would like to end on this. Actually, the Islamophobia is not a crisis for Muslims. And I continue to say this. It's a crisis for British, French, German, Sweden, Italian, and American societies. Race is not the black man's problem. Race is society's problem that it has to come and contend with and to solve this disease within it so that the black man can be treated as a fair and equal human being as the rest of humanity. So I think that we need to correct the narrative, Talib. And I believe that what Yanis mentioned in his previous comment was extremely important. The state must stay away from appointing or self-appointing the people it wants to speak to, that sees that represent the community when they have absolutely no representation whatsoever. This is something that I feel that every European state has committed a keen error of doing, and it's simply creating gaps between it and between the various Muslim communities, as Abdinur has said.
Well, thank you very much for this precise and very clear, I think, answer to what I have asked. Now, Hamid, since the beginning of your talk, you had, sort of solutions in your mind about what to do to address the challenges that Muslims and other minority communities are facing in the country. Now, you can be more specific, maybe in the area of education, in the area of media, in the area of politics. What are the things that Muslims and non-Muslims can do? And also you said, I think, there are many people in the country, but their voice are unheard of. They are maybe not Muslims, but there are some intellectuals, and they are not happy with what's going on in French society. How do you think we can also mobilize them to make them more, let's say, vociferaries, so that their voices could be heard in criticizing the state policies towards Muslims? Hamid, did you hear me? I think Hamid's connection is
thank you. It's very good.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. Yeah, despite of being victims and seeing a kind of victimization of speech, they have to take their own responsibility, of course. I mean, the Muslim and the French Muslim, and not also the French Muslim, but the European Muslim, they have to take their responsibility by engaging themselves in the society. As he said, Anas, he made a very good point, an important point. Islamophobia, racism, race matters is our problem for all groups of society, all categories of society, and that is very important. We have to deliver this message that Islamophobia is a problem in our society, and we need to evaluate and to have a global solution together to bring the all different tendency in France or in Europe and to solve this problem. To solve the problem and to say that today we are confronting a lot of things, such as the COVID-19, the social and economic crisis in Europe and in France. And Islam and racism, discrimination has taken as a kind of pretext to because they don't have a response to give or to relate this economic and social crisis. Today, we have a kind of tendency in Europe, not only in Europe, but in the world, that they are kind of extremist party, that they are raised, right? Because we've seen that many political leaders, despite of giving a solution to the voters, they try to find a racism speech and to give a not hope solution. That, I think, is important things, but we need today to create, our channel, and to have like political parties to create organization and to create our think tanks that can also give an answer response to the society, but not just only for the French Muslim, but for the all different categories of society. That is important. Also, one of our main measures can be also with the OIC. I mean, France hosts more than 8 million Muslim, French Muslim, and they have the legitimacy to ask for a seat in this organization and to build a dialogue, a civilizational dialogue with the Muslim world and the Western Union countries. And I think they can build also this dialogue by taking place with, or by organizing a culture dialogue, such as a civilization dialogue with many countries. France are more near to the North African countries than to the other European countries, as I said every time in the French media, and that is very important for our society. But also the French Muslim has also to speak in the media and to take their own responsibility, despite of being like or victimizing themselves in the media by saying we cannot do nothing, we cannot taking some I will say actions in the society. That's what we have to do today, and I hope they will have more actions than just going to the media. We need more actions.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I will come to Yanis about the future perspectives. Now I want to ask you maybe two layered questions. One layer is the response of the European Union and also the Muslim world as far as Macron's speech, because Macron's speech was in a kind of profiling Muslims, demonizing Muslims. I think that's how it was interpreted, at least in the Muslim world. And I just want you to have your views on the response of the European Union and also the Muslim countries. This is one question. The second question is actually the following. When you look at the populist parties in France, actually far-right parties and racist parties, they receive a significant portion of the votes in elections. I remember that at one time Le Pen's party received 30% of the vote. That is I think large a social base that accepts racist views. Is it possible to integrate into such a society where racist parties receive so much support from the public? The floor is yours, Yanis.
Thank you for the question. And I'm going to connect your question with an issue that you mentioned before about the relationship between French Muslims and different Muslim states when it comes to sending imams, etc. You have, as you mentioned, a tendency now in France and from the French government to try to blame and to demonize any role coming from a foreign country in France with the French Muslims. But the problem is that the French Muslims themselves are saying since years that they don't want to be the puppets of different foreign countries and they want to be independent. But from the French government, it seems that they want to cut the link with different Muslim states in order to better control them. So we can't cut with different states to be under the control of another state. So it's a problem. We want just to be free. We want to be independent from different Muslim countries, but at the same time, as Muslim, we want to have the freedom to build some good partnership with different institutions in the Muslim world, because we are French and European citizens, but we are also Muslims, part of a global community. And we have these double belongings, and we could be also a bridge between Europe, between the West, and between the Muslim world. And instead of seeing us as a threat, they should see us as a positive part of the society, as an asset for the society. When it comes to the reactions in the Muslim world, I think it's something which is showing that more and more the world is globalized, and the country can't act as they very want without any consequences. And France now is paying the price of its Islamophobia, which is going on since decades, at least 2 decades. And France should take also into account the global consequences of what they are going on in France, as it's the case for other countries. And in fact, France is very often criticizing many countries around the world. And now it's turn to be victim of this. And diplomacy is important. And you can't have a double speech, like saying when you address the Muslim world or some Western country like US or UK, no, in France, Muslims are free, we have laicity, we are respecting everybody. And at the same time, inside saying to Muslims, oh, you are separatists, or and wanting to ban an organization like CCIF, the Collective Against Islamophobia in France, is just crazy, because CCIF is just an organization which is defending the civil rights of Muslims, which based upon the French laws. So it's a big problem. The other issue, and I will end with this, is that in this debate, we are focusing on Islam, on the issue of extremism, of terrorism, but we are totally avoiding in the French debate the issue of the suburbs. In France, in the suburbs, since decades, we have lack of social justice. We have French ghettos where are living many Muslims, and not only Muslims, but the majority are Black and people of North African backgrounds, and they are facing racism. They are facing discriminations in the job market and in many spaces. And which kind, like few months ago, we had in France big demonstrations in many cities against police brutality and racism. And which kind of answer the government offered to these issues? Nothing. And we should highlight how many Muslims in France, especially from the suburbs, are involved in solidarity actions. During the time of COVID-19, for instance, you had many organizations who were involved in helping sick people by bringing them food, bringing them goods, making shopping for them. And the medias don't talk about that. And on the ground, if you make a study about this, you will see how Muslims in France are involved in the common good, for the common good of this country, irrespective of the religious belongings of the people.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think we have had a very fruitful discussion today on the French case, Islamophobia, extremism, and secularism. And we have, I think, come to a point that those issues are not Muslims' issues. Those issues and problems are the issues of the host societies and states. And therefore, there should be a shift in the mentality and vision of those countries when looking at the Muslims. As Anas has said, Muslims would like to be treated equally with all other people as equal citizens. However, we see that there is a rising populism all around the world, I think, and European states are also being influenced by that. Therefore, the future, we should be optimistic about the future, but also we should be realistic about where the politics are, heading to. Now, we come to the end of this discussion, but please feel free to have 2 minutes if you like, if you would like to add something at the end of our discussion, or if you would like to just remind us the things that we have just maybe missed. Maybe we can start with Abdunur. If you have got 2 minutes, if you would like to add something, Abdunur. Please turn your mic on, your mic. Yeah.
I think it's on.
Yeah, now it is on.
Okay. So it's very interesting when we actually to wrap up this excellent session. And as Dr. Anas said, it's still a complex topic. But here again, when we speak about Islam and Muslims in France, I mean, the direct picture goes to what Dr. Yanis said about the so-called suburb. So I lived in the US, and when you say I live in a suburb, it's you belong to the middle class and you are well off. However, here it's a cliche, has become cliche about the, okay, I'm not going to use this silly word of Sarkozy, but of the one who are struggling in their daily life to give a better life to their children. Actually, they are doing the community or the groups here who belong to the Muslim community are doing an excellent job in terms of education, actually capacity building initiatives. And like say, for instance, when the French media speak about the suburb, let's say, for instance, here in Paris, the main, let's say, cliched one, I mean, the cliché one is the Saint-Denis department. I mean, pejoratively, I mean, they say in French, le 9-3. So that means, okay, you are, excuse my English, you are a loser. No, they're not. Actually, the imam of the mosque, he is the head of the pediatrician service in intercommunal hospital. And the people I know, they are, from these children, are engineers, lawyers, as I mentioned earlier, are reaching the French Ivy schools. And so there is a hope. And we can't be pessimistic. So we have to be optimistic on this issue because, as I said, and I keep saying this, those people are not going anywhere. This is their country. So if there is, this is the relation, it's not about host, guest, community relation. It's about, let's put all together. How we are going to put all this together, actually it resumes in one verb, is to understand.
Okay, thank you, Abdunur. Anas, would you like to add anything?
2 quick points. First of all, Muslims are still treated differently in the eyes of the law whenever they commit crimes. Bear in mind one very important factor. When a French Muslim or a British Muslim or a German Muslim, when they commit a crime, and I call it crime, not an act of terrorism, a crime, because ultimately it's a crime. And I think that the segmentation of the law, one law for criminals and murderers and serial killers and rapists, and one law for Muslims, that's I think is very dangerous. But when a French Muslim or a British Muslim commit a crime, all of a sudden they're a Muslim. But when they win the World Cup for the French national team, they're French. We need to understand that these individuals are products of French, British, German, Swedish societies, education systems, media, philosophy, ideology. And therefore they are inseparable. You can't separate the identities. So to treat Muslims differently simply because they commit a crime than anyone else, meaning a white, French or German or British can go and kill several people in a synagogue or in a gay bar or wherever, and then be treated merely as murderers. But once a Muslim commits a murder, is seen as a terrorist, that is problematic in terms of the narrative. The second part that I want to say and finish with is that Islamophobia is still unrecognized as a crime under the criminal law in our various countries. It's not treated on par with anti-Semitism. It's not treated on par with anti-homophobia and with homophobic attacks. And therefore, it's crucial that we are once again seen as equal in terms of the dues, our rights, as well as our responsibilities. Once we do that, then we'll be able to take this discussion much, much further and talk about how we then can develop our societies together.
Well, thank you. Hamid, you have 2 minutes if you would like to add something.
Yeah, I would like to make one point briefly that was important related to what he had said, Anas. We need to fight this Islamophobia, and there's one just suggesting this idea, important idea or proposal, is the way to fight this Islamophobia is, for example, the OIC, who has more than 57 Muslim countries, can also propose an international day of Islamophobia to United States and to establish that Islamophobia is a crime in the world, in the humanity. This can be, for example, a good initiative, a diplomatic initiative with all Muslim countries to establish one international Islamophobia day in the United Nations, such as others, for example, day or others events, And that is the way how to find the Islamophobia. And this Islamophobia is today a very, cancer and a big disease in the world. As I said as well, the OIC can play a major role with the French diaspora, the Muslim French diaspora, and others, Muslim diaspora in Europe, to establish a good connection with the other countries, and to take, a sustainable project to find this Islamophobia with, for example, an observatories against Islamophobia or such others initiatives that can be taken by states and European Union. And why not to create as well in one big summit with the European Union and the OIC to establish a good dialogue, a civilization of dialogue against racism, against Islamophobia, and to establish a day.
Thank you, Hamid. I think that's a good call on the part of OIC, 57 member countries. Yanis, the last 2 minutes are yours. Go ahead if you would like to add something.
So as a French Muslim involved in these debates, I just hope that our voice will be heard in France and not demonized and marginalized, because now the attacks, even on many French scholars, saying that they are Islamo-leftists and part of the rise of terrorism, is just crazy to hear this from the voice of a minister. Like any society needs scholars to understand the roots of any phenomena, to fight it, not to promote it. If we want to understand the roots of extremism and terrorism, it's to fight it, and because we want also to get rid of this problem, which is dramatic. And the other element is that we have a specific kind of Islamophobia in France, and we see that the situation is better in other countries like UK, US, or Canada. But despite this, Islamophobia is a global phenomenon. We have Islamophobia in US, in UK, in Germany, and we have a high level of Islamophobia in countries like India or China. And so it's a global phenomenon nowadays. And it's important, I think, to connect each other, especially to connect Western Muslims, because we have a common challenge and more common challenges. So as a French Muslim, I appreciate, for instance, that many Muslims in UK, US, and other countries are caring about what is going on in France. And we should also do the same in order to be a force of proposition and a good contribution to resolve these issues, not to add a problem to many problems, but to offer solutions for a peaceful future for the Western societies.
Well, thank you very much, Yanis. Gentlemen, thank you for participating and making comments and analysis, sharing your analysis with us. Abdul Toumi, Anas Al-Tekriti, Yanis Mahil, and Hamid Shariat. Thank you very much indeed. I thank you on behalf of our audience and on behalf of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies. I also would like to thank Professor Ahmed Uysal, who is the director of ORSAM. And I hope that we can come together to discuss other issues and other important developments in the world. From all of us, goodbye to all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.